Hi, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Literary Distraction with me, Hazel Gaynor, live from Ireland. I don't know how many weeks now that we're doing this, but I have to say this is becoming one of my favourite parts of the week. It's something to look forward to. It gives me an excuse to put on a nice top and some makeup and to chat to you. And I've had such lovely feedback. Everybody seems to be enjoying hearing about the process of writing my books, going back through them in order that I wrote and published them. And yeah, but it's just nice to connect in this way and break up the week. So thank you all for continuing to watch and to listen and engaging in the comments to win a copy of the book I'm talking about. And congratulations to Kathy, to Anne, and to John, who are the winners of my last three books on the giveaway that you can enter by leaving a comment underneath this video. Any comment really, just to say hi, or if you've enjoyed the book I'm talking about, or how you're doing during lockdown, and I'll pick a random winner of all the comments at the end of the week and send on a copy of this week's book, which is The Girl from the Savoy. So there's two versions of this book, because this book was the first time that I actually started to work separately with my publisher in the UK. So for all of my books from The Girl from the Savoy, I've had a cover for the US and Canada, and a different cover for the UK and Ireland and Australia and New Zealand. So it was really fascinating for me to see how those two covers developed for the different territories with The Girl from the Savoy. This is the American and Canadian cover. The book is set in the 1920s, which is hopefully evoked by this gorgeous woman on the cover. And the Savoy it refers to is the Savoy Hotel, one of the most iconic grand hotels in London. And the book tells the story of a young woman, Dolly Lane, who honestly is one of my favourite characters. I just adored writing her. She's a young woman from the north of England who shouldn't really have much hope or expectation for her life. She's a maid of all work, doesn't really enjoy the job that she's doing, but she longs to dance on the West End stage. And The Girl from the Savoy follows Dolly's story in how she becomes a chambermaid working at the Savoy Hotel, and how that gives her access to the very different, very glamorous lives of the very wealthy people who stay at such an establishment. I really came to the idea of writing The Girl from the Savoy when we were at the peak of Downton Abbey, and I just adored that whole upstairs, downstairs scenario of what was going on amongst the maids and the butlers, and what was their life like compared to the Crawley family who they served. And I started to think about that scenario in one of these grand hotels where anybody important had to be seen. And what would that upstairs, downstairs situation be like if, like Dolly, you were employed as a chambermaid at one of those hotels, which would give you access to the room of those famous guests. And that's where the idea of Dolly's story came in. And it also, this is the UK, Ireland, Australia, New Zealand cover. Very different. It's very interesting, isn't it? The different interpretations by the cover designers. So Dolly's life intersects with that of a really fading star of the stage in London in the 1920s, our character Loretta. And it's how Dolly and Loretta's lives become enmeshed and merged together through another character, a gentleman character who becomes a bit of a love interest for Dolly. And it's really that sort of play between youth and age, between having had everything at your feet, and having been revered and adored as Loretta has been, and yet her star is starting to fade, and this young protege of hers comes along, and it's how Dolly really takes Loretta's place. It's set in the years following the Great War, so there is a part of the storyline which picks up on that event. There's a little bit of a mystery that flows through the book, so I won't go into too much detail, but there is a nod to the aftermath that all of my characters are experiencing, having just come out of the war. And really, the 1920s, the Roaring Twenties, as they became known, were the first time that the young, or anybody really, but particularly the young, became known as the bright young things who really relished this freedom that came after the war, and pushed the boundaries of particularly what women were enabled or allowed or expected to do. There was a lot of partying, drinking, cocktails became a big thing. It was really all about society and socializing. And I have to say, having now experienced some of that limitation and restriction on social life, I can empathize and understand with that era more than I've possibly ever had. How much there must have been that longing to go out and to party and not have oppression of war and rationing and restrictions. So really, it's quite interesting that this book is set in the 1920s, and here we are in 2020, experiencing some of those similar limitations on what we can do and where we can go. So perhaps there'll be another roaring 20s when we emerge from all of this. So the Savoy Hotel was a fascinating place to set the book. It's got an amazing history. Really, anybody who has ever been anybody, particularly actors and actresses, have all stayed there, from Fred Astaire to Frank Sinatra to Marilyn Monroe, Charlie Chaplin, so many famous guests. And I spent a fascinating afternoon there is an actual small museum at the hotel, and they have this amazing archive of photographs and information about guests, and little trinkets. And I spent a fascinating afternoon with the hotel archivist, who talked to me about how the hotel was set up in the 1920s. There has been refurbishment, it's been replanned since. So what hotel would have looked like in the 1920s is a little bit different to the hotel you walk into now. But there is a lot of the history there, particularly with interestingly, the cocktail bars. The American bar is one of the famous cocktail bars at the Savoy, and I have had the pleasure of drinking a couple of cocktails in there. And I thought I'd just share this with you, which was a gift given to me by my publisher at the time that the book was published. This is the Savoy cocktail book, and this has about 80 years worth of famous cocktail recipes that were served in the hotel cocktail bars, which were a very new thing in the 1920s, this idea of mixing spirits in different ways. So this is a really fun book. I've experimented with a few of the recipes in here, and it's just really fun to look at the history of cocktails and see what people were drinking back in the day. So this has been a really great surprise addition to my understanding of life in the Savoy. So yeah, it was a really fascinating book to write. The history, as I say, it took me, really, I had to understand what it had been like for the young people during the First World War, and then what happened to society, what opportunities there were, what limitations were still there for women, how difficult it was for somebody like Dolly, who really was expected just to stay at a life in service, and yet she takes these opportunities that come her way to try and improve herself. And there's a little bit of a love story that runs through it. Lots of sort of stepping onto the stage with Loretta and understanding what that felt like as a famous actress at the time. And I also did some of my research at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, which is one of my favourite museums. They have, which I hadn't realised, they have a completely separate research wing, if you like, to the museum, where they hold theatre archives. And I spent, I think, 2 days digging in and around these fascinating scrapbooks that would have belonged to famous icons on the stage at the time, where there were newspaper clippings of first night reviews, lots of gossip about celebrities at the time, fascinating adverts about what costumes they'd worn on stage, who had designed them, and sort of crowds that thronged to the theatres for opening nights. I mean, we see sort of celebrity culture now and think it's quite a new thing. Absolutely not. You know, these celebrities and stars of the time were mobbed when they came in and out of the theatre. There were police cordons, people lost shoes, rushing up to try and get the best seats in the theatre. So there was all this wonderful history that I hopefully have weaved into the story of Dolly and Loretta, and seeing that contrasting upstairs, downstairs, and also walking in and around a hotel like the Savoy from Dolly's point of view, which I found really fun to write and really fascinating to step into their shoes for a while. So that's The Girl from the Savoy. We're taking you into the 1920s. And of course, I have a copy of the book to give away. So just leave a comment at the bottom, and I will choose a random winner at the end of the week and let you know. And then I'll get the book sent out to you as soon as I possibly can. So that's that. That is book 4, and we've lots more to go. So it's quite fortunate, really, that I have such a backlist, because this is going on several weeks more than we thought it might, and possibly longer. So plenty more to talk to you about. Next week's book will be The Cottingley Secret. I have to stop and think sometimes. I get mixed up about my publishing dates. So The Cottingley Secret is a book where we are going to be walking in the shoes of some fairies at the bottom of the garden in a little town in Yorkshire called Cottingley. And it's a fascinating story. So I will tell you more about that. An absolutely perfect bit of magic to sprinkle on these very difficult times. So I hope you'll enjoy joining me again next week and listening to that book's story as well. So thank you for listening. I hope you're all keeping well and safe at home. Stay busy, keep reading, and I'll see you next week. Bye.